But the first question I have for you is how and where did you find wrestling, and in what way would you say it's impacted your life?
Well, I started wrestling in 11th grade in high school. And I had an older brother who wrestled in ninth grade. And, he just did it a year, and that was really all I knew about it.
Hmm.
Um, and then starting my junior year, I had a buddy, David Snow,
Hmm.
who wanted to go out. And he asked me if I wanted to go out for the team with him. And I said, sure. I was a band guy, so I had been a drum
Right.
major in ninth grade and was in the marching band and all the concert bands and everything. And so started wrestling that year and just loved it. Took to it like a duck to water. It was just the best thing going for me. And obviously, I wrestled where I could then. So I wrestled 119, weighing 106.
Right.
And then the next year, I went 106. I dropped down. I actually gained some weight. Actually grew to 112 and dropped to 106 for that season, and ended up placing third in the state.
Wow.
And I would say wrestling, sometimes I say it saved my life,
Hmm.
but it gave me a better life. My
Right.
mother and father, they may have dropped out of school in eighth grade or ninth grade. They didn't finish school, um, and that was a time really that you could get away with it. My dad joined the service at 17, became air traffic controller, so he was a bright fella,
Hmm.
and so I grew up on a air base, and had a great education, and but there was really my parents didn't have that education drive. They didn't have parents who instilled it in them.
Hmm.
And wrestling put me in a position to where I went to college and entered college, had a wrestling career in college, and got an undergraduate degree, and went on and got my master's degree. And now my wife and I, we have two sons who one's a college grad working for Lockheed Martin, and one just finished his junior year at NTSU. And, so wrestling has been extremely important to me.
Would you say that like you mentioned, wrestling helping you have a better life, would you credit the work ethic that wrestling builds towards that?
Well, I would definitely credit the work ethic. I was always a pretty physical little guy, and but but it was always wanting to be a part of something. I think also that played a role.
Right.
And my college coach, my high school coach, was a football player in college. He played football for the Citadel, Coach Doug Johnson, and he didn't know a whole lot of wrestling, but he knew how to train young men.
Right.
And then in college, I was just fortuitous to enter UT Chattanooga at the time that Ethan Reeve became the new head coach, and I tell you, it was life changing for me. And so I just soaked up everything he said. You do this, do this, do this, and I did it. I didn't question it.
So with you mentioned Ethan Reeves' coaching style and the impact that he had once you got to UTC, and following suit with what he said, would you say that accredited to your success in college?
I have observed a lot of different coaching styles. Very few of them would have took me from a beginning wrestler in 11th grade to a two-time Southern Conference champion. Very few of those coaching styles would have done that. And Ethan's style of coaching, because it worked for me. I just don't see it happening for me under another style of coaching. You know,
Right. And like you probably seen before throughout different interviews, and it's been said multiple times. Ethan Reeves' coaching style, it was very regimented. It was very down to the pinpoint on what you were going to do and what the purpose behind it and etc. And Bud Hennenball, who I had on in one of my recent interviews, said that that coaching style and that structure allowed those wrestlers to be the best they could be at the time.
Well, it certainly was for me, and it certainly was for many of my teammates. And I know you want to allow young men to have some input into what they're doing,
Right.
but there's a point that they don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a point that they've never been there, and when you get young guys who are extremely talented and they've been wrestling all their lives and they have a lot of accolades, you know, that's a wrestler who that guy didn't walk into our room. We didn't have those guys. We didn't have the 5-time, 4-time state champions coming into our room.
Right.
And so to get to the next level, we had to make up time. We didn't have the 80 matches a season, 100 matches a season, between high school and youth wrestling, in one calendar year.
Well, I think the intensity that that room carried with the structure that it did and the wrestlers that were in there that were willing to put in the work and really buy in attributed to that success that that group had for the time that it did.
It was a special time, and there were guys who came through who didn't stick around, and for whatever reasons, and sometimes it was because of the demand on us in the wrestling room. But if you could bottle it and sell it, would be wealthy. But the guys that were in that room with me and Coach Reeve, I'd go to war for them at any moment, even to this day, just for that short period of time, 4 or 5 years,
right,
impacted me personally in incredible ways. I'm fearful of what my life would have been like if I did not have that moment.
Right. And you mentioned the impact that it had, and that kind of draws into my next question. Overall, what was it like adapting to that college room and the environment that it brought?
For me, it was pretty easy because it was all I knew. Like I said, I started wrestling in high school in 11th grade, and my coach, who was not a wrestling coach, knew how to train. So we worked hard. And when I stepped into the college room under Ethan Reeve, I had no other experience, and so I didn't have a whole lot of wrestling coaches to compare it to. So for today, you may get guys going into college who have had, 4 to 6 wrestling coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and that's challenging for a young guy, because he's got that young wrestler, male or female, has got to commit to this new coach at each level, and
Right.
It's easy to say, well, my old coach or did it this way, and so that can be a difficulty in itself that creates an obstacle for young people.
No, that's a good point about a lot of wrestlers nowadays having very different coaches, and each coach I think has a different style in a way. There's always that one of a kind style that a coach starts off with and builds and ends with by the time they say they're done coaching. And if a wrestler, I think, is transitioning through, say, youth to high school to college, and maybe past that, when you switch levels like that, you're bound to get a different coach. And I think that goes into where you have to have an open mindset to realize that we're all trying to accomplish these similar things in the sport of wrestling, but it just may be taught in a different way.
Right. Well, there's a tipping point there. I mean, there's wrestlers who are moving who reach a level of maturity in their sport, and a qualified coach, multiple qualified coaches can come in and coach them in the corner, and they move smoothly with that,
Right.
because it becomes a point of just sort of helping that wrestler kind of stay focused and guide them and help guide them, or stay on track, or eating, the diet they're taking in. And so, but it's really in that critical formative years where you're learning technique and you're learning intensity and how to stay intense and how to stay focused for the duration of the match, which is really the difficult part, is to keep complete focus for those 6 or 7 minutes.
Right.
You get up one time and you've given up 2, 4, 6 points.
Right. No, the factors that go into, staying under control and, if you get a lead, not icing your lead, there are plenty of matches where somebody get a 1 point, 2 point lead and they try and sit on that lead, and
Absolutely.
eventually it ends up not working out for them.
Yeah, you've got to keep scoring points. You got to stay in it mentally the whole time.
Well, a great example of that is Dan Gable and Larry Owens. Owens got a big lead. Gable came back, and then it was really close for that last minute, a minute and a half or so of the match. And Owens just kept putting on the pressure and kept going after him to the point where he was able to get that final takedown and those final near fall points that gave him the match. It was a crazy match with a crazy pace, but they just both of them kept the gas pedal down, and Owens was able to do enough to prevail in that match.
Yeah, in those types of matches, it's hard to criticize a Dan Gable, or a Spencer Lee.
Right.
It's hard to criticize those guys. I mean, they're icons. They've paved the way and showed what can be accomplished. And there's other gentlemen like those guys, like Cael Sanderson. But those moments they've never been in, really, at that level. Not with that intensity. And sometimes it just doesn't play out. Sometimes, and it's difficult. I would say Cael Sanderson, by far, for me personally, has been the most impressive, because he had a college career of 40. He was like 40-0, 44-0, 40-0, and 44-0.
Oh, straight through.
Straight through. Multiple time NCAA MVP. And there had to be times he felt bad, was ill, injured, slight injuries, but he was able to keep it together through that entire time, and that's extremely impressive.
Absolutely. And it really didn't seem to show a crack in his armor. And, we kind of draw back to Gable a little bit. He's mentioned before that as much as that loss was unfortunate, he needed that loss to get better and win that gold medal in the Olympics, because I guess in the best way to put it, it kind of provided a reset, and it put some fuel back on the fire, and he really kicked it into overdrive to win that gold medal a couple of years later in Munich.
Well, I know he had the rematch with Larry Owens in the Olympic trials, and it didn't go well for Owens that time.
That is a good point. Yeah.
Different style of wrestling, but still.
Well, actually, I think I don't know if I'm fully right on this. I think they wrestled 3 times. Once before the NCAA championships, then another time.
But you may know. I don't know. I just know the 2 occasions they competed against one another.
Right. No, actually, the Olympic trials match after the NCAA championship slipped my mind. But the philosophy behind that win, though, is so interesting, because if you look at it, Gable says he needed that loss, and Owens wish it never happened.
Right. Well, I'm sure Gable would have rather not lost that match.
Right.
And if Gable had not lost that match, very good chance he would have gone on to an Olympic gold medal as well. You know, but what I think what he might be expressing is, you know, it allowed him to reevaluate what the sport meant for him.
Exactly.
You know, and we all go through that. You know, in sport, in our careers, you know, we're always reevaluating, you know, is this something I want to keep doing?
Right. No, in a sport that is provide, I wouldn't say provide, but expose you to so much adversity as it does, I think it's always critical to be able to go back and reevaluate and not necessarily shut down, but study and figure out ways to get better and have that structure and plan on how to say improve the next time around and so on. There's just plenty of examples of that throughout the sport and in other sports for that matter.
Well, you know, wrestling, you know, you can win the national championship and you come off the mat and your coaches are saying you could have done this better. You know, it's just sort of the mentality of, and I'm sure other sports are that way, but it's really that aspect is really uh um I don't know, just like it's part of the lifeblood of our sport, you know,
Right.
just like that improvement and the perfect match, trying to have that perfect match, you know, is more meaningful in ways than actually winning that match.
Right. No, and a good point as well, because I think in wrestling, one thing that is emphasized so much is always looking to get better and improve something. Because John Smith stated this after he lost to Randy Lewis in the Olympic trials, like last chance qualifier, is it reminded him that there are people out there that are better than you, and you always have to be ready for the unexpected and the expected, and always have to look be one step ahead. And with that, that goes down to doing the small things, this proper diet, doing extra after practice, drilling everything match speed, and really trying to perfect and master your craft, working when other people are sleeping, to say the least.
Right.
Now, kind of reverting back to coaching and things of that nature, after your collegiate career, what made you want to get into coaching?
Well, you know, when I was finished with college wrestling and moving out into what I was going to do with my life, you know, I wouldn't say I was burned out on the sport. You know, I don't really know if that's a true statement for anybody, you know. Um, but it was the time away from the sport that uh, you know, God, man, that's such a great question. It would just seem like a spiritual quest for me to get back into it, you know, and because it was something that, you know, made me happy. It provided me self-esteem. It gave me purpose, you know, and so what Coach Reed did for us and for me personally to be able to recreate that, hopefully, possibly for other young people, and allow them to get that empowerment in their own life, was what I wanted to be a part of, you know.
That's honestly it's one of the best ways I've heard that, say, put into perspective, wanting to share the impact that this sport has and the impact that a coach could have on an athlete or a wrestler or whoever. And I think that just ties into how this sport is truly unique in the aspect that it does not leave your life. It applies to so much off the mat.
Well, we also see that expressed in our community, all around the community, from different schools train and work together and work with other coaches. Coaches may take Mike Newman for a long time, would have a lot of guys from the community come in and train with him at school in the off seasons. And it was just Mike knew Coach Newman knew we were going to compete against those guys, but it didn't matter. He was willing to, help that young man get better.
Right. Well, the sport is so competitive, and there's many reasons behind it. And yes, winning is extremely important. You want to win. People would be lying if they went out there and said they didn't care about winning, especially in a sport like this. But whether it be wins, losses, championships, they come and go. The humility that the sport builds, and whether it be the courage, work ethic, or etc., lasts a lot longer than any match or any time spent on the mat.
This wrestling is unique in the way that, and I don't know if I'm staying within what you're commenting about, but in life, we're going to deal with hardships.
Exactly.
Some are going to be accidents that maybe we lose a loved one, or disease, we lose a loved one, or divorce. We may have parents who have divorced, and or we may divorce our spouse, and or our spouse chose to divorce us.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to respond to that? Are there people in your life depending on you? And wrestling mimics that, in my observation, as well or better than any sport there is, because we train together as a family, and we help one another improve. And there's arguments and there's brawls within that family in that practice room. And then the moment comes that we have to step out into the world, which is our mat, and compete one-on-one for the whole world to see.
Right.
Everybody in the gym. And so how do you respond in that moment? Do you shut down when you're out there, or do you respond to it and you rise to the occasion? And sometimes we shut down, and sometimes we fail at that, and we go back, and our teammates and our coaches help us analyze what happened, and hopefully next time we learn and we go back out and we can perform to our best ability and not worry about the score. Now we want to win that match,
right?
But if we perform well, we have a much better chance of winning that match.
Right.
So the focus there is performance, either athletically on the mat or it's in our daily lives. Wake up Monday morning, man, I don't want to go to work, or I don't want to do this. But you got to push through that those moments.
Mentioning, pushing through those moments and just going the extra mile really ties into a quote I was about to bring up. One of my coaches, Paul Schreiner, has mentioned time and time again that in wrestling, whether that be the last sprint or the last several minutes of that live match after a hard practice, those moments where everyone has to dig down deep and persevere and figure it out, you look back on it 10 years from now and you consider it some of the best times of your life. Because that's where you had to figure it out, and you had to really show yourself and how you deal with that adversity. And he said the work ethic and the effects that those moments have would help him in work, with staying after and getting extra work done, and really persevering, because he could look back and say, I'm able to do this because of what wrestling has taught me.
Yes, yeah, and and that goes back to those moments in your life that are challenging, whether like it's a loss of a loved one or disease or whatever, and you apply to those moments what you've learned through your sport. And sometimes it's subconscious. Sometimes you don't even know you're applying it.
Right.
It's just become a part of your personality. And to get people willing to learn that about themselves in sport through practice and training, not everybody's really willing to go that deep, when they're training.
Well, and I think in the aspect of going that deep in training, it goes back to if you're willing to put yourself in those positions to figure it out. And because in a match, at some point, you're most likely going to be in a position like that where you have to figure something out and just, keep the pedal going. And whether it be if you get behind in a match, say, you're down 10 points, you still have a whole nother period to wrestle. It may be a large margin score, but you're not entirely out of that match. Anything could happen. And
Absolutely.
that is one of the amazing things about this sport is that anything can happen. And it's a sport that, yes, while it is extremely tough and extremely challenging, if you buy in, it is for everyone because you could be what you want and desire.
Yeah, there's going to be a perfect situation for all of us, that's going to help us uh, realize that from this moment on in my life, I really do know now that if I keep working, things will fall my way.
Right. No, it's a sport that teaches so much and is so prolific um, in the aspect of figuring things out and probably sound like a broken record saying it, but the sport truly sticks with you and the effects of the sport contribute to things and help you even after the last time you take your shoes off and whether it be the last match or the last practice. Well, kind of going into our last question here. All in all, what are some of your takeaways from wrestling?
Gosh, man. Uh, you know, really some of the things we've talked about here, for the past 20, 25 minutes or so. Um, you know, for me, wrestling uh, is just it's what we do with life, and we do it naturally. Many of us just do it naturally. We're grappling and wrestling as little kids, and then we're grappling and wrestling with decision making and with emotions, as we grow up, um, which um, man, you stumped me on that one. It's nothing I really have to think about that often. It just is part. It just goes with me.
I think it kind of reiterating what you said earlier, it provides a subconscious lifestyle where you're able to take everything you learn from it and apply it without even thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels that way. It feels that way for me. And I have two sons who wrestle, and to share the sport with them, and to do it in a way, hopefully, that they embrace it, and because I knew how it benefited me, and I wanted that for my sons and for any of my wrestlers. I want that for them.
Right.
Uh, but you got to be careful along that way, because it's got to be something they want. You know.
Right. It's such a sport where it's nothing you ever want to force upon somebody. just because of the uh, sacrifices it requires and the time it takes. And I think to truly get the most out of the sport, you have to learn to love the sport and enjoy it. And I just don't see it as possible if you're unwillingly doing the sport or you're forced to do it for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah, and I think sometimes, especially with youth wrestling, a lot of young people just aren't emotionally ready for the competition. You know, I've seen little guys go out and just clean the mat with their opponent, like hammer them, but the whole time they're dominating their opponent, they're crying, they're bawling, you know, because of the emotion it brings out in them.
Right.
It's new to them. Those are some strong feelings, and we got to help those guys process those feelings, because it turns a lot of guys away from the sport, because they don't like that, they don't like that feeling, and or you know, they associate uh, um, that anxiety and that adrenaline rush with uncomfortableness,
Right.
you know. And you really got to know your athletes, and if they're your children, your sons or your daughters, you know, you really got to be aware of their emotional maturity.
No, absolutely. I agree 100%. Well, thank you for joining me. It's been great to get to interview you and talk wrestling
Absolutely,
and
man.
coaching and everything of that nature.
Well, I tell you, I've been observing you as well, you know, and from some of the posts you make on the wrestling page and what you've been doing with the Wrestleback podcast, and I tell you, I'm really excited about what may be coming from you down the road.
Well, thank you. No, and with that said, it's a credit to the guests I've had and the people that have been willing to help me out, whether that be getting in touch with the alumni or other wrestlers around the area, and simply, like I mentioned before, the interviewees that are willing to hop on and discuss their story and the sport and everything that goes along with it. It truly takes a village to make this as successful as it has been. And my gratitude goes out to everyone involved for helping me with that. It really does mean a lot.
Well, thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. These interviews provide a great chance to get to, talk with people I know really well, get to meet new people and make new friends in this community. And with such a tight-knit community like wrestling is, it truly is an awesome opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mason. All the best to you, man.
Well, thank you, and likewise, and hope to see you around when wrestling season rolls back around here before we
Oh, you
know it.
will.
But all right, take care, and thank you once again for joining me.
Absolutely, man.